In southeastern Nebraska, a row of trees has been standing for 150 years. They were planted along the southern boundary of a homestead in the late 1870s. The man who planted them was not a botanist, not an architect, and not a government scientist. He was a Civil War veteran who had filed the first homestead claim in American history. His name was Daniel Freeman. He needed a fence. He could not afford lumber, could not afford wire, and could not afford the labor to keep rebuilding either one. So he dug a shallow trench along his property line and planted a row of seedlings that a neighbor had traded him for. By 1885, the hedgerow was complete. Horse-high, bull-strong, pig-tight. Today, that exact same row of trees is still there. The National Park Service maintains it as a historic monument. The fence posts, the hedgerows, the sharpened stakes sunk into Kansas and Nebraska soil by homesteaders who filed claims under Ulysses S. Grant, are still standing a century and a half later. They have outlived the families that planted them, the wars that interrupted their harvests, and every rural government program that ever tried to help them. There is a wood in North America harder than oak, harder than walnut, harder than the white oak used to make bourbon barrels. A wood so dense it literally sinks in water. A wood that made Native American warriors rich, that built the fences of the Great Plains, that survived the Dust Bowl, and that a corrupt Secretary of Agriculture tried to bulldoze out of existence. It is not pine, it is not maple, it is not hickory. It is the hardest wood that grows on American soil, and almost no one builds with it anymore. This is the story of Osage Orange, the wood of kings, the fence of empires, and the tree that two American administrations tried to erase. The archive opens on March 26, 1804, in St. Louis, Missouri. Meriwether Lewis, weeks away from launching the expedition that would carry him to the Pacific Ocean, sits at a desk and writes a letter to President Thomas Jefferson. He encloses cuttings from a tree he has never seen growing wild in nature. The cuttings came from a French trader who had spent years living among the Osage Nation, 300 miles southwest of St. Louis. The Osage had given him the cuttings. They called the tree by a name that meant simply wood of the bow. The French trappers translated this directly to bois d'arc, which English settlers would later butcher into bodark. Today we call it Osage Orange. Lewis wrote to Jefferson that the Osage considered the wood superior to any other material on the continent for the manufacture of their principal weapon. He wrote that the bows made from it could not be broken by any force a man could apply. And he noted that a single well-made bow was valued by the Osage Nation as being worth a horse and a blanket. In 1804, on the Missouri frontier, a horse was the most valuable trade good a Plains tribe possessed. A blanket was a luxury fabric that could only come from European manufacture. Together, they represented perhaps the single largest commercial transaction a Plains warrior could execute. And the Osage Nation was trading that ultimate currency for a single piece of wood. Archaeologists studying the trade networks of the pre-contact Great Plains have traced Osage orange bows as far north as Montana and as far east as Ohio, distances of over 2,000 miles from the tree's native range. The bows were the most valuable item of trade in pre-contact North America. Tribal wars were fought just for access to the groves that produced them. In 1906, the United States Forest Service commissioned the first standardized test of wood hardness. The test measured the pounds of force required to drive a steel ball into seasoned wood. Black walnut, prized for rifle stocks, registered 1,000 pounds of force. White oak registered 1,300 pounds of force. Hickory, the legendary wood of tool handles, hit 1,800 pounds of force. Osage orange registered 2,620 pounds of force. It is the absolute hardest wood native to the United States. It is also one of the heaviest. A block of dried Osage orange will not float. It sinks like a stone. When burned as firewood, it produces 32 million BTUs per cord, the highest heat output of any wood in North America. It burns hotter than anthracite coal, and in soil contact, it simply does not rot. The United States Forest Service classifies Osage orange heartwood in the highest category of decay resistance. The wood contains natural compounds, including a molecule called tetrahydroxystilbene, that completely inhibit the growth of the fungi and bacteria that cause wood to decompose. Untreated Osage fence posts set into the ground in the 1870s are still standing today, intact. During that same 150-year span, cast iron rusted, steel corroded, and pressure-treated pine needed to be replaced 4 times over. In 1847, an Illinois professor declared that a row of Osage orange saplings, planted 1 foot apart and pruned annually, produced a completely impenetrable living fence. He proposed it as a replacement for expensive imported lumber. His timing was perfect. The American frontier was pushing west into a landscape with no trees. The Homestead Act gave land to any settler who could farm it, but the treeless prairie had no fencing material. Without fencing, livestock could not be contained, and crops could not be protected. So they planted the bodark. Between 1865 and 1939, in the state of Kansas alone, private landowners planted nearly 40,000 miles of Osage orange hedgerows. Entire farms were fenced with a single species of tree. That had originally grown in a 200-mile strip of Texas and Oklahoma, but in 1874, Joseph Glidden patented barbed wire. Within a decade, factory-produced wire at a fraction of the labor cost had replaced hedgerow planting. The Osage orange living fence, which had conquered the frontier for 30 years, became economically obsolete almost overnight. But the trees that had already been planted did not go away. They kept standing. They kept producing fence posts that lasted a century without chemical treatment. They kept sheltering livestock from prairie winds. And in 1934, they became absolutely essential to the survival of American agriculture itself. In the spring of 1934, the Great Plains were dying. 4 years of drought, combined with decades of aggressive plowing, had destroyed the native root systems that held the topsoil in place. When the winds came, the soil rose into the air in storms so dense they blacked out the sun at noon. In a single day, one storm carried 350 million tons of Great Plains topsoil eastward, depositing it on ships 300 miles out in the Atlantic Ocean. On April 14, 1935, a storm that came to be called Black Sunday killed livestock and children from Oklahoma to Nebraska. 35 million acres of farmland were rendered entirely useless. President Franklin Roosevelt ordered the creation of the Prairie States Forestry Project. By 1942, the government had planted 220 million trees across the Great Plains to break the wind and save the soil. Osage orange was among the most widely planted. Its thorny density, extreme drought tolerance, and century-long lifespan made it uniquely suited to hold the earth together. By the late 1940s, the dust storms had ended. The topsoil was returning. The trees had saved the farms. In 1971, President Richard Nixon appointed a new Secretary of Agriculture. His name was Earl Butz. Butz was an agricultural economist who sat on the boards of Ralston Purina and other agribusiness conglomerates at the time of his appointment. He believed that the future of American farming belonged entirely to corporate scale, massive mechanization, and the export of cheap corn and soybeans. He saw the small, diversified, hedgerow-bordered farms that had survived the Dust Bowl as an obstacle to corporate profits. Butz had a mantra: He told American farmers to get big or get out. He told them to plant, in his exact words, from fence row to fence row. The fence rows were the Osage orange hedgerows. They were what had to come down. Under Boots, government policy actively encouraged the removal of the very shelter belts that had saved the country. Farmers were told that every foot of tree line represented lost crop revenue. Larger tractors could not turn efficiently at the ends of hedgerow-bordered fields. Across the Midwest, the bulldozers came. Heavy equipment tore out the exact trees that had been planted during the Dust Bowl by the grandfathers of the men now destroying them. Millions of trees were ripped from the earth. In 1977, the poet and Kentucky farmer Wendell Berry debated Boots publicly at Manchester College in Indiana. Berry told the audience he and Boots would never agree because Boots was arguing from quantities while he was arguing from values. A year earlier, Boots had resigned in disgrace after a racist remark to a reporter. 4 years after the debate, he was convicted of tax fraud, but his policies remained in place. The family farms he told to get big or get out were absorbed by mega corporations, and the hedgerows kept coming down. Today, a steel fence post sells for about $4. It will rust out in 30 years. A pressure-treated pine post from the hardware store costs $8 and is guaranteed for 15 years. A single Osage orange fence post will last a century. The wood that built the American frontier has not disappeared. The trees that Daniel Freeman planted in 1877 are still standing on his homestead in Nebraska. Millions of Osage orange trees survive in roadside groves, abandoned fence rows, and the corners of farms too small to mechanize. The wood is harvestable today by anyone with a chainsaw, a truck, and permission from the landowner. If you want to build a fence that will outlast you, your children, and your grandchildren, drive a back road in Missouri or Kansas in October. Look for the softball-sized green fruits on the ground beneath tangled, thorny trees. Ask the farmer whose field it borders. In most cases, he will let you cut what you need for the simple price of helping clear the rest. Cut the heartwood, split it into posts, drive them into the ground green before they harden further with age. They need no creosote. They need no toxic chemical preservatives. In 100 years, they will still be standing. Osage orange is not for sale at the hardware store because a hardware store cannot sell you a fence post that will outlive the business. The hardest wood in North America was traded for horses and blankets by Native American warriors. It fenced the Homestead Act. It survived the Dust Bowl. It outlasted Earl Boots. And it will easily outlast the chemically treated pine that a corrupt politician told American farmers to plant in its place. It is growing, right now, at the edge of a field you have driven past 100 times. The wood of kings is free for the cutting. We did not lose Osage orange, we just stopped planting it. If this vault changed how you see the world around you, do not let this knowledge disappear again. Subscribe to Nature's Lost Vault and hit the notification bell. Every like and every share bypasses the algorithm to preserve what they tried to erase. The next vault opens soon.